I'm going to explain to you how to create your pattern for making this easy grocery bag. You could do this directly on your fabric. I'm doing it on Pattern Ease, which is like a pattern tracing paper, for two reasons. One is I can go through all the measurements once and then I can just reuse the pattern. And also I thought it would be easier for you to see the actual directions by me drawing on this instead of doing it on fabric where it might be hard to see. I want to preface it by, I'm using a pen right now drawing on this because I wanted you to be able to see the lines as best as possible, but I never keep pens anywhere near my fabric or sewing area because I'm like paranoid about mishaps with ink that I just don't want to deal with. So if I was doing this and not videotaping it, this would be a pencil in my hand. So to start out with, I have a rectangle traced that is 21 inches this way and 25 inches this way. Now, as a precise sewer and quilter, I generally never use the lines on my cutting mat because they are thick and not as reliable as the markings on the ruler. But in this kind of instance, a grocery bag, these kind of proportions, 21 inches, 25 inches, if I'm a little bit off by 1/16 of an inch, there's really nothing to worry about. So I was fine. Just I laid the tracing paper on my mat and I counted off lines and just traced the line. So again, 21 inches this way and 25 inches this way. If you don't have a mat that large and you're working with your standard quilt rulers, you sometimes just need to combine two rulers to get the measurements that you want. I'll show you, for example, with the next step. So the next step is you're going to draw a line. I'm going to label this as the top of the bag on this side, and I'm going to draw a line 10 inches down from the top. So I'm going to count 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm going to just lay the ruler down on that line and draw that line. If I did not have a ruler with markings, a mat with markings, what I would do is, this ruler is 6 inches, so I would place the 4-inch line of this ruler on that drawn line. 4 inches plus 6 inches is going to give me 10. So I'll just use the two ruler method to get the measurements that I need. So once you have that 10-inch line drawn, this width is still the 21. So at 10.5, I'm going to mark the midpoint. And then I'm going to mark on either side of it a 3-inch line and then a 3 1/4 inch. I'm going the other way, the same thing. 3 inches and 3 1/4, which is the 6 1/4 mark. And then from each of those lines, I will draw a line up to the top. And just give me a second to make sure it looks relatively straight. Again, it's a grocery bag. And these lines are actually making the markings for the handles. Then you'll just need to curve the handles a little bit, and you could grab an object or you could just kind of eyeball in. And I will cut out the pattern and put the video back on in a second so you can see better what your end result is. So I cut on all the drawn lines, and now removing the extra pieces, I have the pattern piece for the bag itself. So you will cut out 2 of these from your fabric, and then you're also going to cut 2 rectangles to make a pocket, and the rectangle measurements will be 4.5 inches by 5.5 inches. 2 rectangles that size. I took the 2 rectangles, the 4.5 by 5.5 inch rectangles. I put them right sides together, and I sewed all the way around with a 1/4 inch seam, leaving an opening right in between my fingers here, and on both sides of my fingers I back stitched because this is where I'm going to be turning it right side out. So before I turn it right side out, I will clip corners, and I already gave it one pressing at the iron. I kind of press one seam allowance up and away from the other one and kind of flatten out that seam because it makes it a little bit easier when you get the edges all neat on the other side. So this will get flipped right side out, and you will use a point turner to get the corners all out and neat, and a neat looking rectangle, which I will do off camera, and you'll kind of just fold in those two edges where you hadn't sewn, and I'll tell you what to do with that next. But the other thing you're going to do is on your two pattern pieces, the front and back of the bag, you're going to either overlock or zigzag all the way around the edges. It'll make it easier at the last step when you go to just narrow hem whatever edges are exposed. So for those of you with an overlock machine, I went to a 3-thread overlock with the right needle because I wanted the narrower overlock stitch. I don't need it really wide because eventually I'll be turning all these edges under 1/4 inch, and the 3-thread narrower stitch will do just fine. Straight edges are real easy. I ran off. I don't have to worry about most of these tails because they're going to end up getting caught in stitching. The thing for those of you that are newer to your sergers that I want to mention is how to sew a curve. So straight lines are easy, but you need to keep in mind when you do a curve that the knife is a little bit ahead of the needle. So it's not like a sewing machine where you can just turn and pivot. So I cut a piece of scrap fabric to kind of show you how I treat it. So you're coming down with the straight edge. You don't just turn and pivot or gradually curve it like you would on a sewing machine. But what you do on a serge is you kind of hold this edge once you get into the curve. You can hold it almost like it's a straight edge and keep it feeding through, and it works. I would get a little bit of the loops coming off the edge, but it does the job. And what I would suggest doing if you haven't done curves yet on your serger is cut a piece of scrap, cut some curves, and practice a little bit. If you don't have a serger, you can simply do a zigzag stitch along the edge all the way around the bag. The other pattern that I am showcasing in this email is a little bit more detailed and would be easier to do without having a serger. So the quick and easy sometimes are definitely designed for having that kind of equipment to make it go really fast. And so once you get this all prepped, we are going to, I'll get the pocket right. It's a little messy right now, but it will get stitched on 3 inches down on one of these panels, 3 inches down from the top edge, and I'll just center it, and I will sew around 3 sides with a 1/8 inch seam allowance, and then I will be back with the next step. I have the pocket sewn on, so what I did is when I placed it 3 inches down from the edge here and center it on the bag, I put where I had left the opening at the bottom here, and when I edge stitched around with an 1/8 inch seam allowance, it caught in that open edge. I didn't have to do anything fussy to close it. The funny thing here, I'm going to point out my errors because we only learn when we make mistakes. I spent a good amount of time as I was cutting the 4.5 inch by 5.5 inch rectangle for the pockets to make sure that the pattern was running in the correct direction, because this print is actually little tiny houses. It's a fabric collection we have from Stoff of Denmark. It's a really cute collection, and they're little like houses with rooftops, which may be hard to see in the video, but the pocket is right side up. The bag, everything's upside down. It's a abstract enough print, I'm not going to worry about it. Whoever gets this as a gift, they're using it as a grocery bag, but if it were something a little bit more obvious, I wouldn't want upside down flowers or something very distinct. So I just found it funny that I spent so much time on this, and totally when I did the first step, I think the rule is not to sew when you're tired. So anyway, moving forward, and we're just going to consider this a colorful, bright, abstract print and not think of it as houses. The next step is you're going to put the 2 pieces right sides together, and you're going to sew the 2 side edges, and you're going to sew the straps together just at the very top. So across here, across here, and both side edges. And do not sew the bottom. not sewing any of the curves, and then we'll be back for the next. The sides and the very top pieces are sewn. So now I'm going to sew the bottom, and I'm actually going to sew this with the wrong sides together. I'll take the stitch and I'll show you why we're doing that in the next step. I sewed the bottom, wrong sides together, flipped it inside out, and now I've got a pin mark of 3 3/4 inches in from either edge. And what I'm going to do is fold over and pin this down and do the same on the other side. This is going to create the gusset on when the bag is flipped out from the right side. So now I'm going to sew these down with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, and that'll create the gusset. And I'm going up to 3/8 just because I don't want to see the previous 1/4 inch seam poking through at any point. So I stitched across the whole bottom with the 3/8 inch seam. I lock stitch, back stitch at both ends for security. Then when you flip the bag right side out, you've got a neat little gusset happening on the sides there. So it's just a different way to get a gusset. When I did this pattern the first time, I didn't read directions. Why would I read directions? So I had sewn the bottom seam when I did the side seams and the top seams. And then I got to the next step and I was like, oh, she wanted to do something different there. So I wasn't in the mood to rip. I just went ahead and did the gusset the other way, which is just bringing the side seam and the bottom seam together and sewing your little triangle pieces and getting your gusset that way, just like we did with the fabric gift bags. So this one will also have some depth to it, and the last step for this, I'm just going to narrow hem around those edges around the handle. So that's already done on this piece. I folded under the 1/4 inch, and you want to keep it to a scant 1/4 inch because anything more than that will be hard to get the fabric folded going around the curves. So 1/4 inch all the way around. And the very last step, if you choose to do it, she folds the handles in half, and right at that top seam point, you can take a little stitch in a ditch through the all the layers of the handles. It's folded in half, so it'll just fold it in half right at that point, and then they'll taper out when it gets down to the bag. So just I think it's easier to hold on to the bag like that. So quick and easy project, 3/4 of a yard of fabric and a little bit of time.